The lion's den, the glass tower, stretched endlessly into the Seattle sky, its steel and chrome exterior reflecting the gray clouds above. Inside the 42nd floor of Blackwood Enterprises, the air hummed with tension and authority. This was Ethan Blackwood's domain, a kingdom built on innovation, determination, and an iron will that had never been challenged. At 35, Ethan had already conquered industries that others only dreamed of entering. His tech empire spanned continents, his investments moved markets, and his name commanded respect in every boardroom from New York to Tokyo. He was known as the untouchable king of business, a man who never showed weakness and never accepted defeat. The mahogany conference room on the top floor was where deals worth billions were made and broken. Today, it would witness something unprecedented. As the morning sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, Ethan sat at the head of a massive oval table, his dark suit perfectly pressed, his expression unreadable. Around him, 12 of his most trusted executives waited in respectful silence. "Gentlemen," Ethan's voice cut through the quiet like a blade, "we have a problem with the Morrison account. They're questioning our marketing strategy." His steel-gray eyes surveyed the room with calculated precision. "I've brought in an outside consultant to address their concerns." The unexpected arrival, the elevator chimed softly, and every head turned toward the entrance. What they expected was another polished corporate consultant, someone who would nod along and validate their existing plans. What they got was Harper Mills. Harper stepped into the room with quiet confidence, her auburn hair catching the morning light. She wore a simple navy dress that was professional yet approachable, carrying a worn leather portfolio that spoke of experience rather than expensive image. At 26, she had built a reputation for turning around failing marketing campaigns. But she was known for something else too, her complete inability to be intimidated. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, extending her hand with a firm grip. "Harper Mills, thank you for the opportunity." Ethan studied her for a moment longer than necessary. There was something in her green eyes that he couldn't immediately categorize. No fear, no awe at his reputation, just steady professionalism mixed with something that looked dangerously close to challenge. "Ms. Mills," he replied, gesturing to an empty chair, "please tell us how you plan to salvage this situation." The challenge begins. Harper settled into her seat and opened her portfolio with deliberate calm. She had done her research on Ethan Blackwood, and what she had found troubled her. Brilliant, yes. Successful, absolutely. But his business practices often left smaller companies struggling in his wake. "I've reviewed your Morrison proposal," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "And I have to be honest, it's everything. That's wrong with modern corporate thinking." The room fell silent. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. No one spoke to Ethan Blackwood like that. No one. Ethan leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "Go on." "You're treating Morrison Industries like they're just another number on your spreadsheet," Harper continued, meeting his gaze directly. "They're a family business that's been operating for 3 generations. Your proposal would essentially strip away everything that makes them unique and turn them into another corporate clone." One of the executives cleared his throat nervously. "Ms. Mills, perhaps you don't understand the scope of what we're trying to achieve here." "I understand perfectly," Harper interrupted, never taking her eyes off Ethan. "You want maximum profit with minimum regard for human impact. It's the same strategy that's made Mr. Blackwood incredibly wealthy and left a trail of destroyed companies behind him." The spark ignites. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, 10 degrees. Ethan's fingers drummed once against the polished table surface, the only sign that Harper's words had any effect on him at all. "You seem to have strong opinions about my methods," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Tell me, Ms. Mills, what would you do differently?" Harper pulled out a tablet and displayed a presentation on the room's main screen. I'd start by remembering that businesses are made up of people, not just profit margins. Morrison Industries employs 200 families. They contribute to their local community. They have values that extend beyond quarterly earnings. As she spoke, Harper's passion became evident. She outlined a strategy that would allow Morrison to maintain their identity while still achieving growth. Her approach was innovative, thoughtful, and completely contrary to everything Ethan typically implemented. "Your proposal is idealistic," Ethan said when she finished. "Business isn't about feelings, it's about results." "And how's that working out for you personally?" Harper asked, her tone softening slightly, but her message crystal clear. The unexpected response. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself genuinely surprised. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and something deep inside him stirred. He had built an empire, yes, but Harper's words hit uncomfortably close to a truth he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. "I think we've heard enough," one of his vice presidents said quickly, sensing the dangerous territory the conversation had entered. "No," Ethan said firmly, his eyes never leaving Harper's face. "I want to hear more." Harper leaned forward slightly. "Success without connection is just expensive loneliness, Mr. Blackwood. You can acquire every company in the world, but if you destroy their soul in the process, what have you really accomplished?" The words resonated in a way that Ethan wasn't prepared for. He had spent so long building walls around himself, focusing solely on victory and control, that he had forgotten what it felt like to connect with another person on any meaningful level. "You're suggesting I'm lonely?" he asked, his tone carrying a hint of something that might have been curiosity. "I'm suggesting that power without purpose is hollow," Harper replied. "And I think you're smart enough to know the difference." The decision aids. The meeting concluded, Ethan made a decision that would change everything. Instead of dismissing Harper's challenges as naive idealism, he found himself intrigued by her perspective. She had done something no one else had managed. In years, she had made him question his own methods. "Ms. Mills," he said as the other executives filed out of the room, "I'd like to discuss your proposal further. Are you available for dinner tonight?" Harper gathered her materials, considering his offer carefully. There was something dangerous about Ethan Blackwood, not just his reputation, but the way he looked at her with those intense gray eyes. But there was also something compelling, a depth beneath the cold exterior that suggested the man she had challenged today was more complex than his reputation suggested. "Business dinner?" she asked. "Of course," Ethan replied, though something in his expression suggested it might not be quite that simple. As Harper left the building, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just lit a fuse on something much bigger than a business proposal. Ethan Blackwood was used to getting what he wanted, and she had just made herself the most interesting challenge he had faced in years. The untouchable king had finally met someone who refused to bow, and neither of them would ever be the same. The private meeting. The restaurant Ethan chose was intimate and exclusive, the kind of place where million-dollar deals were made over wine that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Harper arrived precisely on time, wearing a simple black dress that somehow made her look more elegant than all the designer-clad women who typically graced Ethan's dinner table. "You came," Ethan said, standing as she approached. He had changed from his business suit into dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, looking more approachable than she had ever seen him. "I keep my appointments," Harper replied, allowing him to pull out her chair. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious about what you really want to discuss." As they settled into the candle-lit corner booth, Ethan found himself studying Harper's face in the soft light. She had freckles across her nose that he hadn't noticed in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the conference room, and when she smiled at the waiter, her entire expression transformed. "Tell me about yourself," Ethan said after they had ordered. "Beyond your impressive ability to insult billionaires in their own boardrooms." Harper laughed, a sound that was surprisingly warm and genuine. "There's not much to tell. I grew up in a small town in Oregon, worked my way through college, and discovered I had a talent for understanding what makes businesses tick on a human level. And what made you want to challenge me today? Ethan asked, his voice softer than it had been in the meeting. Beneath the surface, Harper considered the question while sipping her wine. Because I researched you before I came in. I read about all the companies you've acquired, all the success stories. But I also read about the people who lost their jobs, the communities that were disrupted, the family businesses that disappeared. That's the nature of progress, Ethan said, though his tone lacked its usual conviction. Is it? Harper asked. Or is it just easier to see numbers on a spreadsheet instead of faces? The question hung between them, and Ethan realized that Harper wasn't just challenging his business methods. She was challenging the very foundation of who he had become. You don't know what it's like, he said finally, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. To build something from nothing, to fight for every inch of ground you gain. Sentiment is a luxury I couldn't afford. Harper leaned forward, her green eyes intense. What happened to you, Ethan? What made you so afraid of connection that you built an empire just to keep people at arm's length? The question hit him like a physical blow. No one had ever asked him that before. No one had ever looked past the success and power to see the loneliness beneath. The vulnerable truth. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. He stared into his wine glass, seeing reflections of memories he had spent years trying to forget. I was 23, he said finally. Just starting my first company with my best friend and business partner, Marcus. We had big dreams, revolutionary ideas, and absolutely no money. He paused, his jaw tightening. I trusted him completely. We were going to change the world together. Harper waited, sensing that this was a story Ethan had never told anyone. Marcus sold our patents to a competitor behind my back, Ethan continued. Took everything we had built and destroyed it for a quick profit. The betrayal nearly broke me, financially and emotionally. I swore I would never let anyone get close enough to hurt me like that again. So you built walls, Harper said softly. I built an empire, Ethan corrected. One where I controlled everything and everyone. Where betrayal was impossible because no one had the power to hurt me. Harper reached across the table and touched his hand gently. The simple contact sent an electric shock through Ethan's system. He couldn't remember the last time someone had touched him with genuine compassion rather than calculated interest. But, look what it cost you, she whispered. You have everything and nothing at the same time. The awakening over the next 2 hours, something extraordinary happened. The cold, calculating businessman began to reveal glimpses of the passionate young man he had once been. Harper told him about her own struggles, growing up in a family that had lost their farm to a corporate buyout, watching her father work, 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. That's why you understand, Ethan realized. You've seen what happens when business forgets about people. And you've seen what happens when people betray your trust, Harper replied. We're both products of our experiences, but we don't have to be prisoners of them. As the evening progressed, Ethan found himself laughing for the first time in months. Harper had a wit that matched his own, but hers was warm where his was cutting, inclusive where his was isolating. I should go, Harper said finally, glancing at her watch. It's getting late. Stay, Ethan said, the word escaping before he could stop it. I mean, let me drive you home. It's the least I can do. The ride home, in the quiet luxury of Ethan's car, the conversation continued. Harper lived in a modest apartment in a neighborhood that was a world away from Ethan's penthouse, but as they pulled up to her building, he found himself reluctant for the evening to end. Thank you, he said, turning to face her. For tonight, for today, for making me think about things differently. Harper studied his face in the dim streetlight. What are you going to do about Morrison Industries? Ethan was quiet for a moment. I'm going to try your approach. See if there's a way to help them grow without losing who they are. And what about you? Harper asked. What are you going to do about the walls you've built? The question was loaded with possibility, with the suggestion that maybe, just maybe, those walls could come down. Ethan felt something shift inside his chest, a crack in the armor he had worn for so long. I don't know, he admitted. I've been alone for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to let someone in. Harper smiled, and the warmth of it reached something deep inside him. Maybe you could start with being honest about what you want. What I want, Ethan said slowly, is to see you again, not for business, not for any agenda other than the fact that you make me remember who I used to be before I became afraid of everything. The new beginning. Harper considered his words carefully. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the way he was fighting, against years of self-protection to offer her even this small piece of honesty. I'd like that, she said finally. But I need you to understand something. I won't be another acquisition, another thing you add to your collection. If we do this, it has to be real. I don't know how to do real, Ethan admitted, his voice raw, with honesty. Then you'll learn, Harper said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. We'll figure it out together. As Harper walked up the steps to her apartment, Ethan sat in his car watching her go. For the first time in over a decade, he felt something other than the cold satisfaction of victory or the sharp focus of ambition. He felt hope. The untouchable king was beginning to discover that the most powerful force in the world wasn't control or money or fear. It was the courage to be vulnerable with another human being. And Harper Mills had shown him that some challenges were worth accepting, even if they meant risking everything he had built to protect himself. The walls were coming down, one honest moment at a time. The crisis unfolds. 3 weeks had passed since that dinner, and everything had changed. Ethan found himself looking forward to Harper's daily visits to his office as they worked together on the Morrison account. Her presence had brought warmth to spaces that had felt cold for years, and their professional relationship had blossomed into something deeper and more meaningful than either had expected. But success always came with a price in Ethan's world. The crisis began on a rainy Thursday morning when Ethan arrived at his office to find his head of security waiting with a grim expression and a manila folder full of photographs. "Sir, we have a problem," James said, spreading the images across Ethan's desk. "These were taken by a private investigator hired by Vincent Morrison." Ethan's blood ran cold as he looked at the pictures. They showed him and Harper at dinner, walking hand in hand through a park, sharing a quiet moment on his apartment balcony. In black and white, their growing relationship looked calculated and manipulative. "Morrison thinks you're using Ms. Mills to manipulate his emotions about the deal," James continued. "He believes the entire romance is staged to make him more agreeable to your proposals." Ethan sank into his chair, the weight of his past reputation crashing down on him like a tidal wave. He had spent so many years being ruthless and calculating that no one could believe he was capable of genuine emotion. The confrontation. Harper arrived an hour later, her usual warm smile fading when she saw the tension in Ethan's face. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, crossing to his desk, where the photographs still lay scattered like accusations. Her face went pale as she took in the images. "Where did these come from?" "Vincent Morrison hired an investigator," Ethan said, his voice flat and controlled. "He thinks our relationship is a business strategy designed to manipulate his emotions." Harper picked up one of the photographs, a candid shot of them laughing together at a small cafe. "And what do you think?" she asked quietly. The question pierced straight through his heart. "I think my reputation has finally destroyed something that actually mattered to me." Harper set down the photograph and looked at him directly. "Ethan, do you love me?" The simple question hung in the air between them, like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Ethan had never said those words to anyone. had convinced himself that love was just another weakness he couldn't afford. "Yes," he whispered, the admission tearing from his throat like a confession. "I love you more than I knew it was possible, to love another person." The impossible choice. "Then we fight for this," Harper said fiercely. "We don't let other people's assumptions destroy what we've built." But even as she spoke, they both knew the reality of their situation. The Morrison deal wasn't just important to Ethan's company. It represented a new way of doing business, a chance to prove that success and compassion could coexist. If Morrison walked away believing their relationship was a manipulation, it would destroy not just the deal, but any hope of changing how Ethan's company operated. "There's something else," Ethan said, his voice heavy with regret. "Morrison is threatening to go public with this story. He wants to expose what he calls my emotional manipulation tactics to the business press." Harper felt her heart sink. She had built her own consulting business on her reputation for integrity. If the story went public painting her as part of an elaborate manipulation scheme, her career would be over. "So what are our options?" she asked, though she could already see the answer in Ethan's tortured expression. "I end our personal relationship publicly," Ethan said, each word like a knife. "I make it clear that you were never anything more than a hired consultant, that any appearance of romance was a misunderstanding." "That would destroy me professionally," Harper said quietly. "It would make me look naive at best, complicit at worst." "Or," Ethan continued, his voice breaking, "we admit that the relationship was real but end it anyway. I step away from you, from the Morrison deal, from everything we've been building together. Morrison gets his victory. You keep your reputation, and I go back to being exactly what everyone expects me to be." The power of truth. Harper looked at the man she had come to love, seeing the anguish in his gray eyes. She realized that this was the moment that would define not just their relationship, but who they would become as people. "There's a third option," she said finally. "We tell the truth." "Harper, no, listen to me," she interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "We tell Morrison exactly what happened. We explain that yes, we fell in love while working together, but that our feelings made us more committed to finding a solution that honored his family's legacy, not less." Ethan shook his head. "He'll never believe it. My reputation—" "Your reputation is based on who you used to be," Harper said, moving around the desk to take his hands. "But I've seen who you're becoming, the way you've changed how you talk to your employees, how you've started considering the human impact of your decisions, how you've opened your heart to the possibility of love. That's the man Vincent Morrison needs to see." The final gambit. That afternoon, Ethan and Harper walked into Morrison Industries together, hand in hand. Vincent Morrison, a silver-haired man in his 60s, sat behind his father's old desk, surrounded by 3 generations of family photographs. "Mr. Morrison," Ethan began, his voice steady despite the weight of everything hanging in the balance. "I understand you have concerns about my relationship with Ms. Mills." "Concerns?" Morrison's voice was sharp with anger. "I have proof that your entire romance is a calculated business strategy." Harper stepped forward. "Mr. Morrison, I grew up watching corporate buyouts destroy small communities. My father lost his farm to a company that cared more about profit margins than people. I came to work with Mr. Blackwood because I wanted to prove that business could be done differently. And I fell in love with him," she continued, her voice ringing with truth. "Not because it was part of some plan, but because I saw him changing. I watched him struggle to balance success with conscience. And I fell in love with a man who was brave enough to question everything he thought he knew about power and control." Ethan found his voice. "Vincent, I won't lie to you. I've spent years being exactly the kind of businessman you're afraid of. But Harper changed me. She made me realize that true strength isn't about dominating others. It's about lifting them up." The Resolution Morrison studied them both for a long moment, his experienced eyes searching for any sign of deception. Finally, he spoke. "My wife and I have been married for 41 years, he said quietly. "I know what real love looks like, and I can see it in both of your faces, but that doesn't mean I trust your business practices." "Then don't trust my words," Ethan said. "Look at what I'm proposing for your company. Harper's plan doesn't just preserve your family's legacy, it strengthens it. We're not trying to change who you are. We're trying to help you become more of who you already are." Over the next 2 hours, they presented a detailed plan that would modernize Morrison Industries while keeping the family at its heart. Every proposal honored the company's history while opening doors for its future. When they finished, Morrison was quiet for a long time. Then he smiled. "Mr. Blackwood, 3 months ago, I would never have believed that you were capable of putting someone else's interests ahead of your own profits. But this proposal proves that people can change." He extended his hand. "You have a deal." The new beginning. 6 months later, Ethan stood on the balcony of his penthouse, watching the Seattle skyline twinkle in the evening light. The Morrison deal had been a spectacular success, leading to 3 more partnerships built on Harper's model of compassionate business practices. "Penny for your thoughts," Harper said, joining him with 2 glasses of wine. "I was thinking about how different my life looks now," Ethan replied, wrapping his arms around her. "A year ago, I measured success by how much control I had, how much distance I kept between myself and everyone else. And now?" Harper asked, leaning back against his chest. "Now I measure it by how connected I feel to the world around me. To my employees, to the communities we work with, to you." He turned her in his arms, looking down into her green eyes. "Harper Mills, you challenged me to become a better man, and somehow along the way you made me the happiest man alive." Harper smiled, the same warm expression that had first cracked his armor in that boardroom so many months ago. "So what happens next, Mr. Blackwood?" Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I was hoping you might help me figure that out. As my wife." As Harper gasped and tears filled her eyes, Ethan realized that the greatest victory of his life hadn't been conquering an industry or building an empire. It had been learning that true power came from the courage to love and be loved in return. The untouchable king had finally found his queen, and together they would build something far more valuable than money or control. They would build a life filled with purpose, connection, and the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. Their challenge had become their greatest triumph, and their story would inspire everyone who heard it to believe that even the hardest hearts could learn to love, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is surrender to someone who sees the best in you. In the end, Ethan Blackwood got everything he wanted, but more importantly, he discovered what he truly needed: someone who loved him not for what he owned, but for who he chose to become.